Okay, get ready for this one. We're talking about a theory today that, well, it basically turns history on its head. Imagine if ancient Rome, Greece, they were actually medieval. And famous figures weren't who we think.
Yeah, today we're taking a deep dive into something really provocative. It's called New Chronology. And we're looking specifically at the book The Issue with Ivan the Terrible, part of the History, Fiction, or Science series.
Right, and this book is by two mathematicians, Anatoly Fomenko and Gleb Nosovskiy.
Right.
And their claim, it's huge. They're saying that the history we all learn, the one sort of solidified back in the 16th century, it's just wrong, fundamentally flawed.
It's an incredibly bold assertion. So our mission today is really to unpack it. What are the core claims? How do they reinterpret Russian history specifically? What methods are they even using? And importantly, how has the academic world reacted?
It definitely challenges everything you think you know. So, all right, let's dive in.
Okay, so who are these guys shaking up history?
Let's start there. The architects. Anatoly Fomenko, he's an academician, Russian Academy of Sciences, a maths laureate, and Gleb Nosovskiy, a specialist in mathematical statistics. So their background is in history, it's maths.
Exactly. And they apply these complex mathematical sort of statistical methods to historical texts, to chronicles. That's their angle.
And their radical premise.
It's that conventional history is just broken. They argue most known events actually happened much later than we think, somewhere between, say, 80, 1000, and 1500.
Wow.
Yeah. And they believe almost the entire historical narrative we have now was essentially crafted, that's their word, crafted in the 16th century, and that large parts of it are blatantly untrue.
It's not just adjusting dates then, it's calling the whole story a fabrication.
Pretty much. It's a total demolition job on the accepted timeline.
And they seem very confident. They promise readers will develop a critical attitude, be well-armed against skepticism. They even say the book has enough solid evidence to silence any historian.
Yeah.
It's quite a claim against established scholarship.
It is. They really believe their mathematical approach uncovers patterns hidden from traditional historians. And this really comes into focus when they tackle Ivan the Terrible.
Ah, okay. So Ivan the Terrible, a figure everyone sort of knows or thinks they know. How do they dismantle him?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. They claim that Ivan the Terrible, who we traditionally think reigned for, over 50 years, 1547 to 1584?
Yeah, something like that.
They say he wasn't one person. He was a composite, a mashup of 4 different czars.
4. So the Ivan we know is manufactured.
That's their argument, a narrative construct put together later for political reasons.
Okay, hold on. Is there any mainstream historical basis for questioning Ivan? I mean, even slightly.
It's interesting you ask. Mainstream historians like R.G. Skrinnikov do point out an extreme scarcity of sources for Ivan's time. Archives were destroyed. Key documents like Ivan's letter to Queen Elizabeth I are damaged, sometimes illegible.
So there are gaps and oddities in the record.
Definitely. And Fomenko highlights these oddities. He sees them not just as gaps, but as symptoms, evidence of tampering. He points out that these inconsistencies lead traditional historians to describe Ivan as schizoid, almost contradictory.
Okay, so Fomenko uses these existing source problems as a launching pad. What's the alleged motive for creating this composite Ivan?
According to Fomenko's reconstruction, it all comes down to the Romanovs. They argue the Romanov dynasty coming to power in the 17th century needed to legitimize their rule, so they created this terrible Ivan.
How would that legitimize them?
By painting their predecessors, who Fomenko calls the Horde Khans, as these savage invaders. The Romanovs then position themselves as the heroes, the restorers of true Russian rule, saving Russia from the supposed tyranny represented by the exaggerated Ivan.
I see. So it's about rewriting the past to secure the present. If Ivan is 4 czars, who are they, according to Fomenko and Nosovskiy?
Okay, let's break it down. First, they identify as Tsar Ivan IV, Vasilievich, reigning briefly, maybe 1547 to 1553. Ascended young, married Anastasia Romanova, connecting to the later Romanovs conquered Kazan, then supposedly fell ill. Fomenko suggests this first Ivan actually abdicated, maybe became a monk or something. His infant son, Dmitri, then becomes Tsar, but he's just a baby. So Russia is ruled by a council, the Izbernaya Rada. This Dmitri, they say, died young, around age 10, maybe 1563.
Okay, so an infant Tsar, a council ruling, then what happened?
After infant Dmitri's death, Ivan V's second son, Ivan Ivanovich, takes the throne. He's also young, maybe 10 years old. Now, he's raised by the Zakharians, remember Anastasia Romanova, her family, the future Romanovs.
Ah, the plot thickens.
Right. Fomenko argues these Zakharians then stage a coup. They seize power, destroy that previous council, the Rada, and unleash the Oprichnina, that period of, well, state terror.
The Oprichnina is usually attributed to Ivan the Terrible himself, isn't it?
Exactly. But Fomenko says it was the Zakarians acting through this young Tsar Ivan Ivanovich. He frames it as a civil war, the old Horde aristocracy versus these new pro-Western Zakarians. And critically, during this period, he claims the rewriting of history begins. Chronicles burned, place names changed.
Like Novgorod.
Yes. They claim Novgorod the Great, the major center, was originally Yaroslavl, but the Zakarians, who were from the Spav region, basically moved the name to a town near them to elevate their own origins. This Oprichnina terror supposedly ends around 1572.
Okay, so that's Tsar number 3. Who's the fourth figure making up this composite, Ivan?
The fourth figure is Khan Simeon Bekbulatovich. Fomenko suggests that after the Civil War, the old Horde power was briefly restored. The young Tsar Ivan Ivanovich, now maybe 22, abdicates around 1575.
Abdicates?
Yes. And Khan Simeon, possibly an older relative, maybe 70 years old, becomes Tsar in 1576, but takes the name. Ivan.
Another Ivan.
Another Ivan. This Khan Simeon, ruling as Ivan until about 1584, is who Fomenko identifies as the actual old man of frail health that historians mistakenly attribute to the first Ivan IV. They even say Moscow wasn't always the capital then. Tver became important.
Wow. So 4 rulers spanning decades, all condensed into one Ivan the Terrible narrative by the later Romanovs.
It's elaborate.
Extremely elaborate. And it doesn't stop with Ivan.
Right. You mentioned the Romanov motive. So how does this alleged rewriting campaign extend to other figures? What about someone like Boris Godunov?
Good question. Traditional history often paints Godunov as a usurper, right?
Yeah.
From a kind of obscure background, grabbing power illegitimately after Ivan's line died out. Fomenko flips that entirely. He argues Boris was the legitimate son and heir of Tsar Fyodor Ivanovich, the one who followed the composite Ivan. They even cite foreign documents calling Boris Tsar years before Fyodor officially died.
So why would the Romanovs want to paint the legitimate heir as a usurper? Motive. Fomenko claims Boris Godunov had persecuted the Romanov clan, accused them of plotting against the Tsar. So when the Romanovs eventually did take power, they needed to discredit Godunov retrospectively, make him look illegitimate to make their claims stronger.
Okay, that fits the pattern. What about the false Dmitri, the guy who claimed to be Ivan's son, who supposedly died in another famous episode?
Absolutely gets the Fomenko treatment. He argues the false Dmitri wasn't false at all. He was the real Prince Dmitri.
The real one.
Yeah.
But didn't he die as a child? The Uglich tragedy?
Fomenko says the Uglich story was a fabrication, cooked up by rivals like Shoisky and later used by the Romanovs. This Dmitri, he claims, was the son of Tsar Ivan Ivanovich, the third Ivan in their sequence. He survived, was possibly raised by the Romanovs themselves for a time, maybe even forced into a monastery to neutralize his claim.
And people recognized him.
Fomenko says yes, even his own mother acknowledged him. But the Romanovs, needing undisputed power for their candidate, Mikhail Romanov, eventually had this Dmitri killed, along with his young son, the actual heir, according to this theory. Then systematic destruction of evidence followed.
It sounds like a relentless campaign to erase any competing claims to legitimacy.
That's precisely the picture Fomenko paints. It extends even further. Take Razine's revolt, the big Cossack uprising.
Stepan Reyes, yeah.
Yeah.
Usually seen as a peasant rebellion against the Tsar.
Not according to Fomenko. He reinterprets the mutiny of Razin, 1667-1671, as a full-blown war, led by a rival claimant, a great Zai from Astrakhan, possibly from the Cherkassky clan, with Razin as his military commander. Fighting against whom? The mutinous boyars in Moscow, meaning the Romanovs.
So not a peasant revolt, but another civil war for the throne.
Exactly. And because the Romanovs won, they allegedly destroyed all of Razine's documents, his side of the story, and decreed the official narrative. Razin the mutineer, the rebel.
This pattern of destroying records seems central. You mentioned the Books of Ranks earlier.
Yes, another key piece for Fomenko. In 1682, under Fyodor Alexeyevich Romanov, these ancient Books of Ranks, crucial records of government posts, noble lineage, appointments, were publicly burned, incinerated.
Why would they do that?
Fomenko argues these books contain the real history, the evidence of the previous empire, what he calls the Great Mongolian Empire, or the Horde. Destroying them allowed the Romanovs to substitute new, fraudulent genealogies and histories. He claims many Romanov aristocrats were actually of foreign origin and needed to erase the previous imperial structure to cement their own status.
And this ties into missing artifacts, too, like Ivan's library.
Right. the famous lost library of Ivan the Terrible, historians usually search near Novgorod upon Volkhov, but Fomenko says that's the wrong Novgorod. He claims the real old capital, Novgorod the Great, was Yaroslavl, so the library's not where they're looking.
And he even speculates.
He throws out the idea it might even be the legendary library of Alexandria, somehow transported and then perhaps burned by the Romanovs in their purge of the past.
That's a very bold connection.
It underlines the scale of the alleged cover-up, wiping out not just Russian history, but potentially links to ancient knowledge.
This brings us to the wider scope. It's not just Russia, is it? This new chronology aims to rewrite global history.
Absolutely. The Russian part is just one, albeit detailed, case study. The broader theory claims that all of what we call ancient history, Rome, Greece, Egypt, is fundamentally misdated. They argue it's essentially a phantom reflection or a fold onto the Middle Ages.
So no ancient world as we know it.
Pretty much. Fomenko asserts that reliable written history only truly begins around 8800, maybe even later, like the 11th century. Everything before that, he claims, is based on much later copies, misinterpretations, or fabrications created primarily from the 16th century onwards.
That's staggering. And central to this global view is the Russian Horde.
Yes, this concept of a vast, unified Slav-Turk Empire, the Russian Horde, dominating Eurasia before the 17th century. It's key to his model.
So peoples we consider distinct today, Mongols, Ukrainians, Belarusians.
Fomenko views them as originally components of this single massive empire. Consequently, he tends to dismiss modern national independence claims based on distinct ancient histories as historical delusion, because in his view, they were all part of this one entity relatively recently.
And this involves redating almost everything.
Yeah.
Major figures, places, even religious history.
Yes. For instance, the historical Jesus. Fomenko argues Jesus is a composite figure like Ivan, reflecting multiple historical people. He identifies a primary prototype as the Byzantine emperor Andronikos Ischomenos, who lived in the 12th century AD.
12th century AD.
That's his claim. And iconic places, Jerusalem, Rome, Troy. He sees these often as placeholders, names applied to different cities at different times. He might identify Constantinople or Rome in Italy, which he claims was only founded around 1380 AD, or even Moscow as corresponding to these ancient names at various points.
He even flips the Bible.
Incredibly, yes. He argues the Old Testament was actually written after the New Testament, rearranging the entire timeline of Judeo-Christian scripture.
Okay, if you're going to rewrite all of history like this, you absolutely have to attack the foundations of how we date things. How do Fomenko and his colleagues deal with scientific dating methods?
They dismiss them, pretty much across the board. Archaeological dating, dendrochronology, tree rings, radiocarbon dating, numismatics, coins. They argue these methods are unreliable, non-exact, prone to manipulation, often contradictory, or based on circular reasoning, assuming the chronology they're trying to prove.
So C14 dating, tree rings, established science. They just reject it.
They claim the calibration curves are flawed, the assumptions are wrong, or the results are selectively interpreted to fit the conventional timeline. They assert that no single document can be reliably, independently dated earlier than the 11th century E.
What about astronomical dating? Eclipses, planetary positions recorded in ancient texts.
They challenge that too. They claim that astronomical events used for dating, like the Star of Bethlehem or data in Ptolemy's Almagest star catalog, have been misinterpreted, or that the texts themselves are much younger than believed. They propose their own radically different dates based on their calculations.
So a complete rejection of established historical methodology and scientific dating techniques. It's comprehensive in its contrarianism.
It certainly is. It leaves no stone unturned in its challenge to the mainstream view.
Which inevitably brings us to the reaction.
Mm-hmm.
How has the academic world, historians, scientists, responded to this new chronology?
Well, as you might expect, the reaction from mainstream scholars has been overwhelmingly negative. Our sources are clear. Fomenko's historical ideas are universally rejected by mainstream scholars. They pretty much label it as pseudoscience.
Strong words. Pseudoscience.
Yes. Critics like Professor H.G. Van Buren have called it an embarrassment and absolutely worthless. The consensus is firmly against it.
What are the specific criticisms? What makes them call it pseudoscience, beyond just disagreeing with the conclusions?
The criticisms focus heavily on methodology. Fomenko is accused of things like altering the data to fit his theories, selective parsing and blending, basically cherry-picking dates, events, and people that seem to match his patterns while ignoring things that don't.
Forced pattern matching.
Exactly. Critics say he forces connections where none exist. Regarding the astronomical evidence, for example, opponents argue Fomenko uses arbitrarily selected data points and ignores vast amounts of astronomical data that do statistically support conventional dating.
And what about the dating methods he rejects? Carbon dating, dendrochronology.
Mainstream archaeologists and scientists push back hard there. They emphasize that these methods have been developed, tested, and refined over decades. They point to consistent results that cross-validate each other, building timelines stretching back thousands of years, far beyond Fomenko's proposed 1000 AD starting point for reliable history.
So the core of the new chronology, this idea of a massive, deliberate falsification of history before 1600, it's essentially framed as a giant conspiracy theory.
That's the implication, yes. A conspiracy on a global scale, lasting centuries, involving countless scholars, scribes, and rulers, all somehow coordinating to fabricate or destroy records consistently to create the historical narrative we have today.
Which sounds difficult to pull off, to put it mildly.
Indeed. That's one of the major points critics raise, the sheer logistical impossibility and lack of concrete evidence for such a widespread, long-term conspiracy.
Yet, despite this wall of academic rejection, the theory has found an audience, hasn't it?
It has, particularly in Russia. Fomenko's books have sold over 1 million copies there, and it's had some high-profile proponents, or at least people intrigued by it. You mentioned Garry Kasparov, the former world chess champion. He apparently found some of Fomenko's arguments, particularly about the perceived lack of progress during the Dark Ages, compelling, questioning how Roman and Greek knowledge could seemingly vanish.
But it's also received awards for, well, for being nonsense.
That's right. It was awarded the Abzats Anti-Prize in Russia, specifically for esteemed nonsense at the Moscow International Book Fair. So it definitely evokes very strong polarized reactions. Loved by some, utterly dismissed by the establishment.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've explored a theory, the new chronology, that posits much of what we accept as history, especially ancient and early medieval history, is essentially a fiction. A grand narrative constructed mainly from the 16th century onwards for political purposes, particularly in the Russian case, by the Romanovs.
A truly radical rethinking of the past, challenging everything from the reigns of czars to the timeline of Jesus Christ, backed by mathematical analysis but universally rejected by mainstream historians and scientists as pseudoscience based on flawed methods and conspiracy thinking.
This deep dive really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? Not just about what might have happened in history, but about how history is written, who gets to write it, and why. What really stands out to you listening to this when faced with a theory that challenges the very foundations of our timeline? Does it make you question the nature of historical truth itself? Something to ponder.